All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the end of the world. Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and today we are gaming out apocalyptic potential election outcomes. Michael, this is your topic idea. Do you want to just explain to the listeners a little bit more what you had in mind? Because I'm also kind of in the dark still.
Yeah, I don't really know per se, but it did strike me.
Oh, good,
just like,
good.
There's been so much talk about, and some of it, bordering on the absurd, some of it seeming, frankly, more reasonable actually than some people even give credit to. That like we are sort of on the precipice of an event here that in which a paradigm shift has been floated in many different ways, right? Like the fear of whatever is going to happen as a result of the election, right? What will come after that? Whether it's the Democrats saying that if Trump wins, democracy is functionally over, right? Or if Harris wins, that we're going to devolve into some sort of a purge moment as Trump's January 6ers rise up for real this time. And so I thought it would be interesting to look at some of those aspects of it, but also, somewhere in the middle, in terms of, this is an incredibly close election and what could actually transpire, which is kind of interesting in regards to very rarely do you get events that are mapped out like this that seem to have the potential for unrest to follow, right? Like you'll wake up and
like a Super Bowl, right? I mean, there's a very limited kind of rioting that occurs after sports.
That's right.
Sure.
Some rowdy fans. I mean, the things that you're hearing about what may come as a result of this election are pretty extreme, depending on, never mind how much credit or credence you give them. It does seem like it's baked into the cake now that we just assume that something is going to happen. The first thing that jumped out at me was that, like, I think I said this to you before, that basically everyone agrees that it won't be concluded on Tuesday, next week or 2 weeks from now. And it's like, that to me itself is very interesting as a result of, just seeing the way that every other sort of sophisticated Western democracy turns out their election results in a matter of hours most of the time, right?
I mean, there was a little bit of a faux January 6th in Brazil last time.
I mean, sure, it certainly will happen from time to time, but this seems like, I'm not sure that I can remember in any democracy really, the sort of laying of the groundwork, especially that the Trump team is doing, right, to prepare for this type of thing. And I think given that it's become such a huge issue over the last 4 years, from January 6th on kind of thing, that maybe it's just a little interesting to look at, to separate the mania of Trump's statements from like the potential seriousness of what may unfold.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a real Napoleon III kind of moment here where, he is elected president, everyone's happy, oh, democracy's back, we kicked out the king. And what happens? Just a few years into his presidency, oh, I'm the emperor. Oh, Napoleon is back. Are we faced with another Napoleon III type moment if Trump returns? One would certainly hope so. No, I hope not, rather. Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I mean, have you watch any of the stuff right now as we're recording? He's waiting to go on at Madison Square Garden. He's got 30 warm-up speakers.
Oh, that's all?
Yeah, just the quick 30 going out there.
Imagine being like 27th on that bill. Right. And I'm sure no one's going over, right? I'm sure there's
we just watched together Hulk Hogan.
Trump is in the back lighting people.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Hulkster was there. Yeah, it seems pretty dreadful.
You look at what's being said, and it's interesting, right? Because all of the sort of the fake toning down of the whole situation after the assassination attempt, right? That
right, which didn't even make it through his convention speech, right?
Exactly. That now but like if you listen to this stuff, like it is all tinged with the implication of violence and revenge and retribution. And I mean, to that end, why don't we start with
yeah, I mean, I agree that this is unique, and it feels it's not entirely unique though. It's baked in now, but this happened a bit in 2022. I'm just thinking of the Dilbert creator, Scott Adams. He has that tweet where he says something to the effect of like, if Biden is elected, there's a good chance a year from now you'll be dead. Like Republicans are being hunted, right?
right.
But at the time that seemed utterly absurd, whereas now it seems de rigueur. Whereas in the Mitt Romney election, the idea that Romney would like unleash a horde of angry supporters on the other Americans seemed ludicrous, like something that would absolutely never
and
happen.
We'll talk a bit about that later, but like this sort of feels like almost the sort of logical extreme of both parties for a while now informing their electorate that it's the most important election of a given lifetime, right?
Yeah, and I mean, like, you
know, that's been used to drive turnout forever, but I think as things have been increasingly ratcheted up by the rhetoric on, particularly on Trump's side of it, like the question it does have to become at some point, like, does anyone take that seriously?
I'm trying to remember when that started, because I mean, you grew up mostly outside of the United States, so you perhaps were not as inundated with this media content growing. For me, I think it had to have been like 2004. I think it's like a George W. Bush era when you start getting the
definitely
real.
Wasn't 2000. I mean, people were not scared of Bush in this way in 2000.
I mean, until the Iraq War, 9/11, Afghanistan.
Sure, right. But at first it was like we were running the like, who would you rather have a beer with campaign,
right?
Kind of making fun of this guy who didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But certainly, even then, I mean, you had a genuinely contested election, go to the Supreme Court, and you never really felt like, depending on what the Supreme Court said, there might then be even more chaos. You know, you just sort of thought, and Gore just went out and shook hands and went on his way, right? Yeah. Not to say that was a good thing. We can talk about that later, but like,
I think we touched on it a little bit in our third episode on Inconvenient Truth. Right. But no, I mean, to jump back to what you were, I think, leading me into is, you know, just as an example of the way that Trump has been laying the groundwork, there's this tweet that that came out, yesterday or this morning, in the last couple of days, where he just says, and I'm going to read it, and I'm not going to do Trump because I feel like everyone does Trump now, and it's just tiresome. Cease and desist. I, together with many attorneys and legal scholars, am watching the sanctity of the 2004 sanctity capitalized of the 2024 presidential election very closely, because I know better than most the rampant cheating and skullduggery that has taken place. Did AI write this? That has taken place by the Democrats in the 2020 presidential election. It was a disgrace, capital D, to our nation, capital N. Therefore, the 2024 election, where votes have just started being cast, will be under the closest professional scrutiny. And when I win, all caps, those people that...
Closest scrutiny, but the result is predetermined.
Those people that cheated, all caps, will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences, so that this depravity, capital, of justice, capital, does not happen again. Depravity of justice? It's really quite an ugly phrase, and it feels incorrect. We cannot let our country further devolve into a third world nation, all caps, and we won't, caps lock. Please beware that this legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt election officials. So it's a broad, sweeping class.
It's the purge.
Political operatives, that's donors. Oh no, like I gave 50 cents to Kamala this week. Am I going to go to the gulag? Like, I did not give 50 cents, by the way, but you know, I've been asked to 7,000 times since July. Those involved in unscrupulous behavior will be sought out, caught, and prosecuted at levels, unfortunately, Never seen before in our country capitalized.
This is probably my favorite part is the ending.
Yeah.
Prosecuted at levels unfortunately never seen before. This is one of his great things. Is like he ratchets things up, goes nuts, and then acts like he sort of doesn't have any choice. Like he's such a hero that like, look, it's unfortunate that it's come to this, but I am gonna, drag Democratic donors down the street if I don't win the election.
Yeah, it's
But it's also one of the things I really love about Trump is that he is constantly talking about draining the swamp and constantly talking about sort of the outsider and the pure corruption of it all. But he just loves to brag about totally fabricated support of experts and scholars. He's always saying scholars, right? It's always these scholars say that his economic plan, like, is the greatest economic plan of all time. Like that's what a scholar would say in response to anything, But he's always saying that. No, go and look at it. I mean, all the best scholar, every great economic scholar, he'll say something like that. You're like, what? Who are you talking
like
about?
he can't even name a single one, and that's
Right.
part of it, right? I mean,
Right.
it's this generic straw man scholar who's just all in for Trump.
Yeah.
And
But again, so I guess it's like we'll instead of just speaking purely about the hypothetical scenario, let's just talk a little bit about like what are you supposed to do with this, right? And that's sort of the thing that has, like, to me, created such a paralyzing and confusing dynamic. Because on the one hand, there's this idea like he says stuff like this all of the time,
right.
right? This is, does this help drive some sort of voter suppression? Does it just make people check out? Is it just designed to like satiate his base who just likes to hear him threaten these people? It seems that might be enough. They just love when he threatens this stuff. He didn't drain the swamp particularly last time
at all.
Yeah, and so he's now he's basically now saying he's definitely going to do it this time, which we'll talk about in a bit because I don't think that's totally wrong if that is his plan, what he has been able to do. But what I see is once again, unfortunately, effective politicking actually when it comes down to this, and we sort of saw this a bit, and we've talked about this a few times in 2016, where he started being asked if he would accept the results.
Well, he started doing this essentially, basically like saying that it was going to be stolen.
Not quite at this level,
no,
right?
No,
but certainly put it out there. And the Democrats, just like they are now, have placed themselves on, as the sort of godhead of, reasonableness and this, the purity of the democratic process, and that's what we're fighting for, right? That the reason to vote, and everyone I talk to who is voting for Harris basically says the same thing, that they're voting for the act of being able to vote, that who knows what would happen if Trump got in, right? Because if you ask them to explain one thing that Harris has said that they would do for you, there's very little to go on.
Yeah.
Right. And so once again, the Democrats, I feel, get cornered into this very easily, where now I think the expectation set by Trump and people like Musk is precisely that they will contest this thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think the difference between 2016 Trump saying that it's going to be stolen and 2024 Trump saying it, and, he said the same thing, obviously, in 2020 when he did lose, but is in 2016, it was almost as though it was a face-saving gesture primarily because he expected to lose. So he could lose, he could say they stole it, I'm going to hold my head high, I know I really won, and then walk off into the sunset and make $1 million, drumming up on various scams or whatever. Whereas now it feels like he actually believes it, right? It actually feels fully. I mean, I don't know if he actually personally believes in anything really, but the act is much more full-throated. He's much more committed to the idea that, like, if they somehow beat me, they won't have done it legitimately, and we will pull out every stop to prevent them from actually.
You've also seen, like, you've seen this groundwork being laid for a while now, both through, again, people like Musk online who basically almost exclusively tweets information, quote unquote, that suggests that the election will be fraudulent, right?
Yep.
Backed up by basically everybody in the right wing ecosystem. But the problem that comes out of all of this is that there's no real opposition to this, right? Because the Democrats have ceded the ground by precisely saying that he is this anti-democratic demagogue that needs to be stopped at all costs, and that actually this will happen probably, right? And there's no actual like, wait, what the fuck is going on? Like, is this not disqualifying from being even part of this process?
Well, I mean, they try and say that over and over again, but it just kind of falls on deaf ears for most of his ardent supporters, right? I don't think there's any way you can break through with people who are
I don't think
committed MAGA voters.
Right. But what seems to me to be the case in terms of comparing it to 16, I think you were bang on about what Trump thought was happening. Is that this time I actually also think that he actually thinks that he's winning.
Yeah.
And could be right. I mean, obviously. But I've also noticed a slight shift in the messaging about 2020, right? When he obviously knew that like the 6th was this thorny thing that he had to go back and forth between saying he won it to appease those people, but kind of look like he's not quite trying to become a dictator or whatever. And,
right. He said they were the most peaceful group. I almost slipped into a Trump thing.
Right. But now, as you get the closing argument, right, you get Vance has now figured out a way to answer this question by not pissing off Trump, which is that he now always says like he actually didn't lose the 2020 election because the media wouldn't let Hunter Biden's laptop story be run, basically. And that is basically a cover story for the subtext being like, yes, it was rigged, right? And now he's out here a week before the election being like,
which, just for the record, that's like even weaker than the Dems.
Of course.
Like Dems Russia, like
it is. But it's just
2016 thing, right?
Right. Of course it is. But then, then you see a tweet like this and it's like, yeah, we're all the way back with actually the 2020 election was cheating, right?
Yep.
And here we go. And so like that to me suggests that what I think is that he knows that he thinks that he is going to win the election. Mm-hmm. Like I think he has, these people are surrounded by people who tell them they're going to be president, right?
Yep.
Like, do you ever watch that Mitt documentary?
I never did, actually. Is that the one that ends with him like in the gas station after he's lost or whatever?
I can't remember.
Where he's lost and he just like goes in.
It starts with him. It does this great job of showing what it actually used to be like, right?
Yeah.
And that it starts with him when he's running against McCain was where the documentary actually starts. And there's this amazing scene right at the beginning where he's in his limo, I think, and he's watching Obama give like a speech literally in like Iowa, like running against the Iraq war. And this is in like the run up to 08, right?
2007,
when Clinton is still the front runner. And Romney looks at this and is like, oh, that guy's going to be president. And what transpires is that he wins. And then 4 years later, it's kind of an interesting thing, not to be too kind to Romney, but like what was interesting about Romney in this documentary is that he knows the whole time, essentially, that he can't win. They have to convince him to run. He's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to beat this guy? Right. And then the only time he kind of gets into it is after the first debate. He's like, what the fuck and he is like, what the fuck just happened? It's kind of an amazing moment. He's like, did I just win by a lot here? Like what was going on with that guy? But what you see is all of these yes men surrounding him with like, you're going to do it. We can do it. We can get it done. But wait on these numbers, get these numbers. And, you're getting introduced over and over again. The next president of the United States, the next president of the United States. It's fascinating to see that he knew the whole time. By the time the second debate finished, he came out and he was like, that's it. He was like, that's it. And, I think that there was this level of recognition about, and I know things are closer now, so it is a lot different, but like, if people are telling an egomaniac like Trump every day that he's winning, right? Which is what they're doing, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
that he is going to, because they need their guy, Trump, to like believe that he's getting cheated for
Yeah.
this whole thing to work, right? Why don't we like go through a couple? You've got down here a couple of the like possibilities here. So
just like what could happen on
yeah,
November 5th and days following, right?
that's right.
So
That's right.
number one is like Trump wins in an electoral landslide, right? And wins the popular vote, right?
Yep.
Pretty unlikely that this will happen, but could
I
happen.
think so.
All the swing states flip. He gets Georgia, gets Arizona, gets Nevada, say. He gets Wisconsin, whatever. And on top of that, the Senate flips, keeps the House, increases the House majority, and then has the opportunity over the next 4 years to just enact all of the worst case scenario policies. Right. And that would include what? Completely ignoring climate change, increasing level of fracking, drilling, reducing the power of the EPA and all regulatory bodies, letting Elon Musk run the federal government, essentially.
Go line by line into the budget, I guess.
Yeah, and just like slash and burn the entire social safety net. Continue to allow the worst instincts of Israel in the Middle East to dominate. Not that we have much hope of that stopping either way.
No.
But
What do you think? What do you think about the idea? I heard this idea floated that part of the reason that Israel is being so incredibly widespread in their violence,
belligerent,
yeah, that it helps to elect Trump as well, in a sense, right?
Because by just making it seem like Biden can't do anything,
right? Because they know that if they get him back, it will be easier to then continue doing whatever it is they want to do.
Not that it's been hard under Biden.
No, but like,
right.
I can see the,
and there are some other possible advantages to having Trump in,
right.
He has certain business ties, and
and then on top of that, he obviously says he wants to deport 20 million people, which I think is functionally impossible.
And basically allow Russia to annex the Ukraine, right? I think if you deport the 10 to 20 million people, you have actually an economic collapse in the United States, and probably like a global depression would be the end result of that.
Right. And certainly when you spell it out like this, it does build the case to vote for Harris.
Yeah.
Right. We'll say that much.
Not that either of our votes really matter. I mean,
no, sure.
We both
but that's
residing in states. You guys are probably still registered in New York, right?
Yeah, it's New York. Yeah.
So, then in theory, because Trump would be term limited by the Constitution, he probably set up some kind of Vance Don Jr. follow-up ticket, or some other, MAGA loyalist. And they would, if he lives long enough, I could see him becoming a kind of American Erdogan, or Putin. Remember that weird time when Putin was like not the president of Russia? Medvedev was in there, but clearly Putin was still the president of Russia. Sure. Right? Medvedev was like, "No, I'm the one with the authority." It was like, okay, which we haven't really had in America. I mean, the Republicans like to pretend that Obama was this for Biden, but I just don't believe that was true.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like the tragically apocalyptic outcomes that are at play, I do think there's this other side of people. There are people who are convinced that the day one Trump is in, it's a calamity, catastrophe like we've never seen. And then there's people on the other side who are like, he's already been in and he's all a bunch of bluster, right?
Yeah.
And how bad is it actually going to be, et cetera. And the thing that again, I don't fall on the really extreme side either way with it, but I do think a couple of things are important to note here. I think that 2020 was actually ideal for Trump in many ways because it got him out of the way of the COVID disaster and the inflation that was going to come and all of that stuff. And the way he lost was perfect in that it was close, no matter what you do think about it. It allowed him to drum up that grievance.
Yep.
But also importantly, like as we'll talk about in a second, that like it really did help him get the time to fully take this party over, to build an apparatus inside of the party that, if he was going to drain the swamp or get rid of every fucking government worker, it just would have been way harder to do in 2020 than it would be now, given the control he has over his people.
Right, and it was certainly impossible in 2017.
That's right. And so like that's why, like, in a sense, the threat, I think it's disingenuous to kind of go in either extreme direction. I think there's still reasons to believe that it would not be immediately, martial law or what have you. But also, like, I think it is. I do get frustrated when people on the left, in particular, just kind of act like there's no distinction here,
right?
Because it is different. And in terms of the apocalyptic possibilities of election day, that's also sort of playing into my thinking here. Because 2020, when it happened, he had been through a pretty rough 4 years. It was not a good presidency. He got fucking panned. He lost, still close, etc. This is the last kick of the can. And everybody knows that. Everybody knows that the only way that he would even be around in 4 years, ironically, is if he starts getting the same type of cover that Biden was getting that allowed him to briefly run. This guy's mind is also, diminishing.
I mean, to some extent, he has been getting that cover. I would argue.
Oh, sure. Right. I'm saying, like, in terms of 2028, if he has some
2028 is a long way off, and that feels,
but I'm saying, even if he has some deranged, lofty goal of like becoming president forever and stuff, right? That he's not going to run again for president in 2028.
No,
he does not win here. And that's the thing that kind of stands out to me in terms of January 6th, and the difference between now and then are the power of the apparatus that he has built, right? Combined with whatever he does choose to tell his people was always couched in he's going to come back in 2024. And it's sort of like, and the very loss built this energy and has turned him into an even bigger cult figure now. If he loses now, we literally are just hoping that a guy who has never shown the ability to admit failure, walk away, whatever, will actually be confronted with the end of his political life. And so will his supporters, who have been told that we are going to have a single party state on day one by people like Elon Musk if Harris wins. And that to me is like at least kindling,
Yeah, no, for sure. So let's go to the other extreme. What if Harris wins in a landslide? She wins popular vote by 8 million, 10 million votes. She wins all the swing states and keeps the Senate and flips the House. My prediction is that absolutely nothing good would be done for 2 years, at which point the Republicans would take over both chambers in a landslide. I mean, like we've seen this movie before, right?
Uh-huh.
I have very little hope if Harris does win, and regardless of the outcome of the congressional elections, of her enacting anything even as progressive as what Biden was able to enact.
No, of course not. And why would she? Because her mandate, if she does squeak this thing out, her and her people are going to be able to argue that the mandate came from this, sophisticated approach in finding the conservative voters who were sick of Trump and January 6th and these types of people and the Liz Cheney of it all. Right. And so that's like that's the problem that I have with people when I do talk to them about voting for Harris, which is like, well, we've got to do this thing. Like, not only are you signing off on a genocide, on top of that, you are saying that moving to the right in every conceivable moment, like we said last week, where they don't even talk about Medicare for all, they don't even talk about climate change. I can't tell you one thing that Harris plans to do for me, other than maybe give me a small business loan if you start a small business in a
historically disadvantaged area. Pell Grant forgiveness right.
And of course, maybe they will, we say won't do anything good for 2 years, but they may be able to achieve things that match up with their political mandate, which is just also frightening in terms of what it suggests about what is possible in American politics in the next
next decade.
It's a complete disaster. No matter what, you're basically just trying to figure out what level of a disaster we are sort of heading.
That's right. And I think that if, the only thing that would possibly be good that they could do is just get a few more reasonable, non-religious maniac Supreme Court justices in, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's about all I have hope for. All right, so a couple other more scenarios. Electoral college tie.
Yeah. Is it
So
is it is it plausible even?
it's not likely, but it is possible.
Uh-huh.
I've seen a couple of Edinger-Mentum's maps
Oh, okay.
that result in a 269 split. And basically what happens in that scenario is it's very odd. Each state gets one vote, but the way that the vote is determined by the size of the delegation. So in other words, like if you have a state that has 12 Congress people in it, if there are
Okay.
8 Democrats and 4 Republicans, that state will vote Democrat. And just the way that things have worked out with the gerrymander, and I think it would be the new Congress that would vote this too, not the one that's sitting now. So the House of
Okay.
Representatives. The way basically Trump wins if this happens. The current split in delegations is 26 to 22. There are 26 for the Republicans, where Republicans have majority of the representatives in their delegation, and there are 3 that are split. No, 2 that are split. There's only 50. So Trump will win, but it'll be like one of the cheapest feeling wins ever, and it will be things will get ugly. This only happened once, right? This happened in 1800. When
Really?
yeah, the third election, the Adams versus Jefferson election, and it only happened then because there was a flaw in the Constitution whereby, like, if you're voting, the vice president was the guy who got the second most votes, which is why Jefferson was Adams's vice president, even though they hated each other.
Okay.
And then, so Burr and Jefferson ran as a ticket, but then it ended up that Burr and Jefferson had the same number of electoral votes because people voted for them both, even though Jefferson was supposed to be the, like, the president, Burr was the vice president. Like, this was a flaw that no one had noticed until it was like, and then the Congress had to decide it. I think Burr was like, Burr kind of a proto-Trump figure in his way. But anyway,
let's get to the big one.
Trump wins popular vote, loses electoral college.
Yeah.
This is like very unlikely. Just based on
this is very unlikely, but
can you imagine
the worst one?
Yeah, because we've had George W. Bush, we've had Trump.
It happens to the Democrats all the time.
Trump in 2016, right? I mean, this has happened multiple times, and in fact, the only time a Republican has become president and won the popular vote since 2000 was in 2004, right? And Democrats are always like, "Oh, abolish the electoral." Can you imagine if the shoe was on the other foot suddenly? Like, I feel like the Electoral College would be just like, it would be abolished. Just like force of will would lead to this. I mean,
this is the one, right, where if this actually played out with everything that has been said so far by, like we talked about, the sort of the media ecosystem of the right and Trump, it is very hard to imagine that there wouldn't be, I think, unrest, to be putting it lightly, right? Like,
right.
That's where I just don't see any chance that there wouldn't be violence.
Right. And I mean, we've already, there are already, as we'll talk about more in a minute, like these election deniers in positions of authority in terms of overseeing the election boards and things like that in places like Georgia, Wisconsin, North Carolina. And in this scenario, I could see them just being like, yeah, actually, we're like, even though, Harris technically won our state, we're just like going to give our votes to Trump. And I mean, you already have people like this guy, Andy Harris, who's like the Freedom Caucus chair. He's a rep from Maryland, saying basically just like, based on the hurricane, Hurricane Helene, North Carolina should just probably give all of its votes to Trump, right? Because, these are Republican affected areas. So probably, why bother? This is like before the voting has been counted,
Yeah.
It's like, seems.
I mean, this is the scenario where, I don't, it's not a huge leap to me to see like armed Trump supporters
Oh yeah.
in election offices or state houses and
Oh
stuff like
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't see that coming from the Harris side if the situation is flipped.
No, I mean
Obviously,
we know there'll be
maybe that's
a march of women with hats that go to Washington
right,
on
right.
January 20th or whatever. I mean that's it's all already we've seen this movie before, right? I
Yeah,
mean, and one thing I was saying to you before we started recording was just that I think when if Trump wins, oh, tipping my hat, what I think is going to happen, but
mm.
I think we're going to see actually less of the resistance stuff that we saw in 2016.
No, why do you think that?
I just think people are tired of it. People are exhausted, and quite frankly,
The only thing I would suggest in contrast to that is, and I know that like obviously there is the like the hat parade of it all, but I do think that the abortion issue,
oh yeah,
if he does win, and especially in this manner, that I do think that that is going to drive a lot of political activism. I find it hard to believe if he gets in that we aren't going to see much worse when it comes to that side of things. So I would imagine there would be a response about that, which kind of feels like the only activist energy that is left, and kind of the only thing that it is kind of the bulwark against Trump. I think, right, is finding
yeah,
those
yeah.
voters who maybe voted for Trump in 2016 or 2020, who stuff like the weird argument and the abortion argument works enough.
Resonates with, yeah.
And that's who she seems to be going after, right?
Well, primarily like Republicans who might flip via the
Right.
insane Cheney stuff, but I don't want to talk about that anymore. Yeah, and I mean we basically just covered like the most likely outcome probably, which is that Harris wins popular vote, loses electoral
Mm-hmm.
college, and it's just
Yeah.
like I don't see it being quite the groundswell of people going to the airports when the Muslim ban was announced, for instance,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll see that. But just a couple more things, like yeah, you point us to this Rolling Stone article, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
that kind of alluding to what I was just saying, like there are all these election deniers who are now in a position to impact the certification of the election,
Mhm.
right? So
I mean, so why don't we like, yeah, because this kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, which is that I think one of the differences here is that there is an apparatus in place now to either ironically corrupt the election, right? Like this is the great trick that they seem to be able to pull.
right, that
Like that,
in the name of election integrity, they have allowed themselves to corrupt the
right.
election.
And I think that the very act of setting the public expectation that you are not going to leave on Tuesday night with an idea of who the president is going to be, um, that is going to create the possibility for actually more corruption. That one of the reasons that democracies try to count quickly and effectively and honestly is precisely to not devolve into a politicized battle over individual votes in individual counties and then have the people in charge get a disproportionate amount of power, right? And so the article says, I think we'll just read it quickly. It's a certification of election results is what legal experts consider a ministerial task and one required by state and local law. But as Trump's lies about the 2020 election have taken hold, Republicans nationwide have decided that certification provides them an opportunity to hear fraud allegations, right? You imagine like a group of people coming in front of these being like, I saw someone eat a dog or whatever, right? Like this is
Yeah.
like the new, give them a chance to explain themselves. And that they can refuse to officially count local votes. Republicans, according to the article, have already refused to certify election results at least 25 times since Trump lost in 2020.
Yeah.
There's a quote from a Democratic election lawyer, and I think this is sort of exactly how I feel, and what I'm probably the most worried about is this is Mark Elias, who says, I think we are going to see mass refusals to certify the election. Everything we are seeing about this election is that the other side, the Republicans, is more organized, ruthless, and prepared. And that, to me, really does sum up basically the whole ball game, right? Which is The Democrats are fighting for an abstract principle of democracy that has been, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, absolutely trampled on in American life, certainly in the entire time I've been on the planet. But it is still the thing that they have basically staked their whole campaign to. The Republicans are actively trying to seize power.
Yep.
And that's the distinction here. And all I will say is that very rarely in that exchange do the people who just try to go out and vote come out on top.
Yeah, although they did in 2020, right? I mean, a lot of this was tried, the various Mike Lindell cyber symposia. I mean,
I'm sure, but I just don't see the 2020 thing nearly on the same scale as what they are pulling off here. Like
really?
I know that he was for in that moment, as much as Trump could be, it felt there was a degree of Trump that was beleaguered, that was down, that he had been through the.
I mean, he just had COVID. Yeah.
Right. And again, I don't know, but I know there was an attempt to not certify certain states and stuff, but they have actively looked at the process and tried to have an influence in it that simply was not there in 2020. And so, yes, I agree that it was definitely sad, but again, this is the other beauty about him losing in 2020 is even the sophistication of information or disinformation dissemination. Just look at what is being told to people right now who are in that right-wing bubble on their algorithm about how illegal the election already is every single day. And so that to me is the biggest difference. I don't know sort of, I guess, how bad it gets or whatever, but I do know that when you start saying that it's all about the integrity of every vote counts and all of this, it drags out the process. And the further that it's dragged out, the simple, beautiful act of voting, which is all the Democrats have basically offered anybody, once that becomes secondary, right, to, okay, how many votes got cast in this county in Georgia, and who is running that election office, and who has the lawyers to come down and battle over every one. This isn't going to be, was it Broward County? It's not going to be one spot in Florida, man.
Yeah.
If this goes this way and he's trying to challenge something, let's say he loses Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, maybe let's say he loses Georgia, let's just say for purposes of the conversation, but they're all insanely close. You could see battles everywhere, all over the country in terms of specific counties and think about the stories you're going to hear, even on election night. Musk is going to be posting stuff like, doesn't this look suspicious? This guy's going in here. Should he?
And how much of it will just be generated videos from AI or from Grok and stuff like that, right?
And that, again, that's what intrigues me about the topic, is that it's waiting for us in whatever, waiting for us in 9 days or whatever. We know that this is all coming, and we don't really know, how it's going to play out.
No, we don't. It's pretty frightening. But I'm also trying to find some peace in all of this for myself,
Sure.
I'm striving for that. I'm focusing on my work, focusing on doing some new paintings.
I went for a hike today.
Yeah, there we go. I went up to Hudson, visit some friends, or the Hudson River, walked across a little old railway bridge. It's been converted. Sure. It's beautiful. And I think it's important to not completely, get sucked into the vortex of the election, while at the same time, obviously, it's quite bad, right? Yeah. I mean, I feel like the closing, I just can't get over the Liz Cheney of it all. It's just of all the people.
Just to finish that,
sure,
to wrap up that notion, it's and I mentioned this right at the beginning, that I think that when you tell everybody forever, for decades now, that every election is the most important election of our lifetime, that eventually, as the place gets even more polarized, doesn't feel like it's possible for there to be an election decided by 3% anymore,
Yeah.
And we have set the conditions up with this notion that every election matters more than the one before. That like basically the closing pitch, whether it's Cheney or Hulk Hogan, right? The closing pitch of both parties is if we lose, the country as we know it is done. Period. Full stop. It's over. It could be over eventually.
No.
Not
it's like
who knows what this means for your children or your grandchildren.
It's all finally happening. It's over.
On Wednesday, it is over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, that we have been playing this rhetorical game for a really, really long time. And again, like I think that Trump is deserving of the rhetorical game. I find the Democrats are in a really tough spot when it's like, oh, you gotta tamper it down a bit when you're calling him a wannabe dictator, and he's out there going, "I want to be a dictator," out loud, you know. But you know, like I said, it feels like we have been putting this kindling down for a while now, and maybe once again it won't, you know, go off.
We will not be caught in the conflagration of the kindling.
Right, but like, you know, if the argument is that one of these times it kind of has to go down, if we're going to keep talking like this, if we're going to keep approaching politics like this.
So in other words, like if you keep crying wolf, the wolf's going to hear you. Is the kind of
it. Right. Really well said. Yeah.
Yeah. Could be. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on, or?
No, I mean, I think the more preposterous ones, and some of the intricacies of election day itself, we will save for our pre-election coverage.
Yeah, next week we'll be doing.
I do want to get into sort of some predictions. We're going to actually guess about, I think, some of the map, right? But then I also want to talk about, you know, what we're going to see. We definitely have to have a conversation about which of the CNN panel will shed tears.
Yeah.
You know, obviously Van Jones is the leader in the clubhouse.
Sure, of course. Will Anderson Cooper finally?
He's like the LeBron of crime TV. This guy.
Yeah, it's true. He's an amazing man. All right, so yeah, we'll be back next week. We'll have our predictions episode, which will be helpfully dropping on election day itself, and then a day or two after, we'll have a follow-up second episode.
If we're even allowed.
Yeah, if we're still alive, if
Harris wins, I hear that speech on the internet will be literally impossible.
Yeah,
this may be it.
We may be hunted as political operatives.
Join us next week for potentially our last episode ever.
So hopefully that's all hyperbole. But until then, this has been The End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
I'm Stu, and we'll talk to you all real soon.